The West fears Vladimir Putin is preparing for nuclear escalation. The latest incident is Moscow's allegation of a Ukrainian so-called dirty bomb for use on Ukrainian territory. NATO fears Russia might use this as a false flag attack. Also in the show,
as for North Korea and Taiwan indubitably is an inherent part of the People's Republic of China, and this is the position we've always adhered to.
We'll discuss Putin's comments and more in today's show. Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks, covering the latest global news and analysis from a Taiwan perspective. I'm Yin Khvat. Joining me in the studio to discuss this are Leonard Chao, Adjunct Professor of National Cheng-chi University and previously Taiwan's Ambassador to Swaziland, and Yen Chen-shen, Professor of Comparative Politics, International Relations and American Politics at National Cheng-chi University. Now, in response to Putin's comments, Taiwan has, quote, severely condemned the false statement by the Russian government, saying the country is not subordinate to the autocratic People's Republic of China. The CEO of Russian state oil company Rosneft also made claims Taiwan would soon return to its so-called native harbor of the PRC after he heaped praise on China, which has become the world's biggest buyer of Russian oil. Taiwan's government responded to Igor Sechin saying, neither our government, people, nor the international community can accept absurd remarks made by China's cortege. That was vision of Igor Sechin, the CEO of Russian state oil company Rosneft. Ambassador, can I turn to you? What's behind these comments from Putin and the CEO of Rosneft? Has the coordinated propaganda on Ukraine now turned to Taiwan?
Well, of course, yes. Okay, I think as we all know very well, Russia and China, they have been kind of their relation between both of them. They're always going through lots ups and downs in the past few decades. Now, we might as well call these two countries like a strange bedfellows, okay? Because
marriage of convenience.
That's right. Okay, but of course, speaking of which, I think the United States, should take the credit for successfully putting them together. Okay, but so I am not surprised that because if we can review, the recent few months that Russia and China have always been very closely associated with each other, particularly since the early February when they signed a comprehensive joint statement, as you know, before the Winter Olympics in Beijing, where Putin and Xi they met. Also, in this joint statement, Russia has affirmed its support for Beijing's one China policy, and also they confirmed that the Taiwan is a quote inalienable part of China. So they have to follow the position and words of Xi Jinping of the Chinese policy. Now, speaking of this, Mr. Igor Sechin, he is, as you mentioned, that he is the chairman of the Rosneft. Okay. It's the so-called the energy magnate of Russia, and also he used to be politically, he used to be the vice premier of Russia, and now he is not only a powerful businessman, and I think it's a closest, now one of the closest, I should say the closest political partner of Putin,
right,
and also I think personal confidant. So he has to, of course, follow suit, 100%. To whatever Putin has in mind, and his words and position with regard to Taiwan. So this time, he definitely echoes the same words and position of Putin in this regard. So I think from Taiwan's perspective, we feel sorry to hear that. And as the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or our government has publicly, protested that. And I personally, I don't think we should take it as a big deal. Yeah.
Ambassador, let me have a follow-up question with you. So straight after the 20th Party Congress, Wang Yi, the foreign minister, the first person he called was Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia.
You can tell how close they are
to
each other. Yeah.
Because I understand that there's a convention that you will call your most strategic partner straight after the Congress. And he said very interesting. He said that China was very eager to deepen collaboration at all levels with Russia. So do you think that that was a slight change from what we saw between Xi and Putin?
Well, we have to wait and see. Okay, because that's the first, it's a phone call conversation between Wang Yi and, Sechin. As I mentioned, he said, I'm eager. I thought he's referring to the first name of that, Mr. Sechin. He's eager. Okay, it sounds similar, but it's a joke. But anyway, seriously, the Ukraine war, with regard to that war, it turned out to be, drawn out, everlasting. So China's position has been kind of, a little uncomfortable. They have to keep a certain distance from, perceived by the rest of the world that they are too close to Russia, and in terms of supporting the Russian, the strategy for this war. So I think that doesn't serve the China's interest. They have to keep a little balance between between Russia and the Western, particularly when China doesn't rule out a possibility. While maintaining the relations, traditional, conventional, close ties with Russia, they have to kind of, it's going to be a certain level of a rapprochement. As you know, U.S. is pushing, is kind of trying very hard to have a closer, warm up, I think, in the coming, G20 meeting. So I think it's kind of very tricky. Yeah.
Professor, I wanted to pick up on two things that the ambassador said. Number one, he said that he doesn't think that Taiwan should make too much of a deal out of this. Yeah. But is there also the argument that, even though it has been said before, each time it's said on the international stage that maybe there is a reason why Taiwan must put up a rejection of that? And the second thing is the ambassador said that perhaps the US is responsible for pushing these two powers together.
Well, I would say not just being, a strange bedfellow for them, but also they have we call symbiotic relations. I think they need each other, especially if Russia has been deeply involved in Ukraine war, and if there is something China is creating here in the Pacific here, it might divert the attention of the West from Ukraine to the Pacific. It help Putin. And then Xi Jinping will need Putin to continue in Europe and trap the West's attention there, and then he might have a free hand here. So I would say they have a symbiotic relations.
Are you talking about militarily? Or
no, just politically, diplomatically, militarily as well. It's it's a kind of I need your help and you need my help, and we exist together. And we both benefit from each other. Might not be friend, but it help each one of us. So this is what I see there. But the second one is when China, when Russian, including the businessmen talking about the One China principle, that Taiwan is part of it. If it comes from a democratic Western country, I think we should be concerned. Just like Ambassador, said, if it's Russia, so what? I mean, I think we have taken a position of more like, even though we have no relation with Ukraine nor Russia, but at least we have a representative office in Russia. So right now, we are taking a more pro-Ukraine position, and I think Russia knew that. So when Russia says something like that, I think it's kind of expected. If we supported Russia, or being, silent on this issue, maybe Putin will, not mention this. But since we are, our government, our people, our media are more supportive of Ukraine, I think this is what you're going to expect from Russian.
Do you think, though, that there's a stronger reason, is that, as Ambassador said, is the relationship between China and Russia, as opposed to what Taiwan would do?
Oh, I think, the two countries, again, they need each other. So if Russia have a different position on Taiwan with Beijing, then they can never count Beijing's support of Russia. So they knew that this is like the core issue for China. And China, of course, want to have a big country again to reiterate this position. There is one China, and Taiwan is part of China. And United States right now, according to Chinese diplomats or Chinese scholars, that they have basically changed the one China principle. It's no longer the same China policy, one China policy as before, right? They call it the emptying of the one China policy. So this is where I think China will need another country again to reiterate this position. If this comes from some of our former diplomatic ally, when they switch, they talk about this, I think we kind of expect it. But also from Russia, a close ally of China right now, I think we should not be very surprised.
Okay. Ambassador, on that topic of reinforcing the messaging, there have been examples, obviously, of China reinforcing or amplifying propaganda in Ukraine. For example, the atrocities in Bucha have been censored on Chinese social media. There's also and the blame, I guess, that's placed on the US for the war has been amplified. There's also been the idea of the biological weapons, which was something that was amplified on Chinese state-backed media as well as party media. Can I move now onto the military aspect, because this is an interesting idea as to whether Russia would actually help China militarily in any action over Taiwan. What do you think? What's your opinion?
Well, if I may have a slight follow-up to what the professor just mentioned, and we have been discussing about that, because it's kind of from the long time international affairs experience background of mine that the Russia they given the close relation they're now having with China, and they have to say something. Okay, to please somehow, Xi Jinping or China, to show how close they are and how comfortable they are with it, supporting even more than 100%, whatever. And then they have to say something, and then from our government we have to say something, in retaliation, in the objection to what they say. It's kind of an international drama. We have to play around. Okay. Now, speaking of the Russians, help for China. There's another, unexpected phenomena we're facing. Although we're not very, very happy. But as mentioned earlier, that I think our people in Taiwan, very few of them are aware that Russia has a representative's office in Taipei, as mentioned, and we do likewise have the same one in Moscow. On the contrary, Ukraine doesn't have anyone. And as a matter of fact, we used to, I think I was told that we used to approach Ukraine for this kind of quasi, close relationship, but we were turned down. So I think that's another story. Should we continue kind of the major, the image, the perception goes like we seem to closer to Russia than to Ukraine, mostly following, the Western interpretation, the Western image, perception. And but I think Taiwan, should stand in the middle to be fair, with people concerned that because for our national interest consideration, we shouldn't follow the Western, interpretation or Western ideology. But speaking of the close relation between Russia and China, I think we should be alert, and we should always we should prepare ourselves.
But I don't think Russia will help militarily. For China to attacking Taiwan, because they don't have what we call the treaty obligation, right? They are partners, but they are not treaty ally. So I think we can rule out this. But again, Russia can do something in the Western side that will help to distract. To divert the attention, and so China might have a freer hand. Here. So I think that's what...
So Professor, the recent exercises last year, I think around about the time when the US was withdrawing from Afghanistan, there were actually joint troops in Ningxia in northwestern China, and these were the first to use a joint Russian-Chinese military command and control setup. Does that not worry you, or?
I don't worry about their joint exercise. They have done this, especially in Navy, right? Naval forces, not just in the Pacific, but also in the Indian Ocean, even close to the Black Sea. They have that with even Iran participating. So that's a routine. I mean, country would do that. But since you don't have a treaty obligation for allies, like once you take a military action against another one, the other partner have to join it.
Is that something that we might see in the future, or do you think that would be a red
China
line?
So far has no treaty ally
With any other?
Yeah, even though they have very close relations with Pakistan, with North Korea, with Iran, but China maintained this position to have its leadership in the third world, saying we are non-aligned. We are not like the former Soviet Union or the Western Bloc. We are the third world. We are non-aligned. So they will not have that.
Okay, thank you. Russia has made claims at the UN that Ukraine is planning to use a so-called dirty bomb on its own territory. This is a weapon combining radioactive material with explosives. It's raised some fears that Moscow will use this as a reason to escalate the war. President Joe Biden called any use of nuclear weapons an incredibly serious mistake. At the same time, Moscow carried out drills rehearsing its response to a nuclear attack in an exercise involving nuclear submarines, strategic bombers, and intercontinental ballistic missiles. Russia's defense minister said the exercises were to practice, quote, delivering a massive nuclear strike by strategic offensive forces in response to an enemy nuclear strike. Professor, are there legitimate concerns about Russia's motives behind this allegation of a dirty bomb? Could they give Russia a pretext?
Oh, I think, first of all, Russia will be worried about dirty bomb from before, for example, Chechen separatists. The weaker party, PLA before, or other terrorist group from the Middle East or Southeast Asia, when they challenge the powerful countries like United States or European country or even China, they might want to use something like that that will scare the population and then make their cause known. And there might be some sympathy for them, why they are so desperate to use this. So it is something, a propaganda type of thing. But
Sorry,
it has
Professor, do you mean to use a dirty bomb itself, or do you mean to use
the dirty bomb itself?
Oh, so not the false flag?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So that will be something that they might be able to, alert the world their cause. They are fighting against the dominant Western powers, or even, like minority groups in Xinjiang. They might want to use something like that against China. But if right now it's Ukraine, being accused by Putin, there is a possibility that Ukraine, as a former Soviet Union member, used to have the nuclear weapons, and maybe there was something, it's not clear, there might be some nuclear material that they can use.
But a month ago, the IAEA said that there was no evidence.
But do you remember that during the Iraq War, when the IAEA told United States that there's no weapons of mass destruction, Bush still went into Iraq. So people don't trust United States, trust IAEA. So IAEA, if it says no, I think they're probably not. So Putin, by bring up this issue, I think he's just trying to use his nuclear weapon if he felt needed, and he need a justification, he needs a pretext. So he brought up this issue, and because in the past there is some groups against the stronger opponents, they might try to use dirty bombs. So that's why it sounds reasonable. But if IAEA, I trust IAEA better than the government. So if IAEA said no, probably not.
Okay. Ambassador, this is not the first time that Putin has been called. Ambassador, this is not the first time that the US has said that Moscow could have alleged a false flag. Back in March, there was the allegation of biological weapons that Russia made against Ukraine and the US. What do you make of this? Is this another example just like that?
Well, if I may reply to this question, maybe in two folds. Firstly, that the U.S. and Russia, there has been a series of exchanges of the shouting match between both countries in terms of the reaction or the interpretation of this Russia-Ukraine war. The U.S. keeps accusing Russia for a lot of things. Maybe something Russia did and something Russia didn't do it. But the U.S. is supposed to keep, giving them a hard time. Okay.
Could you give some examples?
Well, for example, when this the rumor the Russia might appear to some nuclear nuclear war against Ukraine a couple of months ago, maybe 2 months ago, and I happened to be in another talk show. And I was alongside my friends that we were invited to show our crystal ball to see if that's going to be a nuclear war, in the war in Ukraine. Well, two of my colleagues, all of them say no. Yes. They're so close to the brink of another nuclear war. I think that the closest time since the crisis in Cuba in last century. But I say though I don't think it's going to be likely to happen because of so many costs that Moscow had to keep in mind.
But Ambassador, my understanding was that the US has always said that there's no evidence. They seem to be playing a game with words.
Yeah.
So is it almost like what they did before the invasion? They did something different.
That's right.
They actually released the intelligence because they wanted to kind of call out Putin, call out Moscow. But actually that didn't work.
That's right.
Putin still invaded. But in this instance, with these false flags, are they trying to do that? Are they trying to say, we know what you're doing, and try to call them out in order to try to stop them? Is that what's happening?
Well, now the time is different from from then, those days, because I think you're referring to the February 24th, when the first round of the war broke out. All the world was anticipating that it might not be a war. Maybe it's a rather a military drill along the border.
Yeah.
Okay, but it did happen. But now it's a different story because now we're talking about nuclear war, whether it's a strategic one or a tactical one, whatever. But because I rather tend to believe that Russia is trying to exercise a certain of bluffing. I'm not saying I might be wrong. Okay, I might be wrong. Who knows? But depending on the kind of how much impact, Putin has been under, because they have the pressure from abroad, also pressure at home. So I think Putin has to figure out the cost, and the effective. Okay, if the nuclear war really you go ahead with a nuclear war in whatever form. I think it's going to be a river of no return. That will keep going, and that will, that will be vulnerable to another, major war to take place. Because if you attack, in the nuclear, weapons, and the other side will fight back with another nuclear warheads, and that will kind of, it's very keep, so escalating. So I think it's very too costly. And Putin now, Putin some international observers anticipated that this war, so Russia used to be in the upper hand. Before they might win. I think some, but now it suffers some, some fight, some failures, and some of the war, zone or battles they lost. So I think it's a kind of a tug of war. But at this moment, if suddenly you want to go to the nuclear, I think that would be highly risky, and the whole world will be against Russia. So Russia now is kind of as you know, recently, I guess 3 days ago. There are a group of 30 congressmen in the U.S. send a letter to Biden, urging them to reconsider the strategic position with regard to the Ukraine war. I think because we're losing the people's interest in continuing supporting Ukraine militarily, economically, and politically. and that was not serve the interests of the US. So when this moment, if Putin can go ahead to run another, very unpopular, let alone like a diabolical move, I think that will lose all the sympathy they're about to enjoy. So I think it's so from this point of view, alongside maybe some other perspective, I'm not sure. I'm not convinced that Russia will appeal to some nuclear military actions. I think that remains to be seen. Yeah.
I think Putin is taking something from Donald Trump's book, because Donald Trump used to say his biggest strength is his unpredictability.
Yeah.
Right. So unpredictability, and we have in international relations a theory called crazy man. Because crazy man, you never know what he's going to do. So if someone is so rational that he is so predictable, then people will respond, in a way that they know it's not going to lead to chaos or other type of conflict. But if you're dealing with someone like Kim Jong-un, or Xi Jinping is not in that category yet, but Putin, some people...
I was about to say Xi Jinping might stop him from doing that.
Might be doing
His
that.
third term.
But Putin definitely can pretend to be that kind of person that you cannot
reason
predict,
with.
what's my next action, and that will be his asset in international relations.
Professor, on the crazy man theory and what Ambassador mentioned, the Cuban Missile Crisis, can we talk about that? Can we talk about what Sergei Lavrov has just said recently? I'll read you what he said. I hope that in today's situation, President Joe Biden will have more opportunities to understand who gives orders and how. The situation is very disturbing. The difference is that in the distant 1962, Khrushchev and Kennedy found the strength to show responsibility and wisdom, and now we do not see this readiness on the part of Washington and its satellites. So what do you make of Lavrov's comments?
Well, I think, first of all, if Washington is involved, any kind of investigation or help or some kind of confirmation that there is no dirty bomb there, will Moscow buy that? No, right? But if it's from United Nations, I think it's more convincing. So it is not at this time right now for Washington to step into this Ukraine kind of conflict with Soviet Union, with Russia, and that will hurt Washington's maybe in the future trying to play a third party, to bring them both of them to a peace table to talk. I think that United States should maintain that, but not right now. That this is not the moment. I think right now you have IAEA, you have United Nations, even European Union might be a more credible player in this kind of tick and tack kind of thing.
What do you make of the comparisons with where we are now and the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was the point at which the world was on the brink of nuclear disaster?
I think what Russia is saying, if United States, you were so concerned about this Cuban crisis here in 1962, because it is close to Florida, it's close to the United States, then you should understand why we are concerned, because Ukraine is right next door to us. It is right in your front door, and you need to be concerned. I think that's the comparison Lavrov is trying to make.
Also, there's sort of certain calculation of the power. If they are on par with each other in terms of military power. But now I'm not saying that a dirty bomb is not possible. But I think so far is rather. My bet will be sort of leaning toward is a bluffing. But unless the certain if Russia certain encounters certain unexpected and very intolerable some reaction from military action from U.S. Okay, U.S. is behind Ukraine. So that's why I think that some of the American politicians have anticipated that. So that they try to to hold Biden for moving ahead another round of, because that would might turn, Putin back to the crazy table to do the next round of moves. But until then, I think so far, let's wait and see. It's not. I hope it's not going to happen. My bet, and it won't. Yeah.
Ambassador, let's bring it back to Taiwan.
Yeah.
Do you think that the PRC could use a false flag attack against Taiwan as an excuse for invasion, especially now that they've created this new normal over Taiwan's air defense zone? That obviously many people have talked about the increased risk of accidents, but is there also a sort of a cover for false flag attack?
Well, in response to that question, I think it's very simple because China has already used the false flag attacks
over Nancy Pelosi's visit.
No. Since the Chinese Civil War, during Chinese Civil War, way before we were born, and that China has used that against the nationalists in the Civil War in mainland China.
Could you tell our viewers about this?
Well, I was not born, but I think because it's kind of a so-called one of the United Front conspiracy war. A lot of the deceiving military action. Those days, Americans seem to be sympathetic toward the PLA, toward the Mao Zedong's soldier, because
the Americans
because media like Snow, okay, along with some others. So because they were being misled by the communists, the bandits move. So they say, okay, we're the underdog. So we kept being bullied by the nationalist, army. So and then they broke their promise, blah blah blah, and they tried to escalate. They're the cheating ones. So KMT was kind of like wrongfully accused by the Western media, American media. But now, so these false flag attacks, they're not necessarily be a military one. But speaking of what's going to happen in these days, if we can review that the most recent 20th Party Congress report that the China, the Chinese Communists, they have affirmed that they're going to they don't want to rule out. They're after so-called peaceful unification with Taiwan, as we all know very well, but with a condition that they were not going to rule out the possibility of going to some means of force against Taiwan. But if I may quote here, that the use of force against Taiwan, quote, directed only solely at interference by outside forces and the few separatists seeking Taiwan independence, unquote. But who's going to interpret this kind of phenomena? Who's going to say, okay, there's a strong evidence that there's certain foreign intervention or some separatists, some of Taiwan independence movement. But the interpretation would be up to China to decide and to react. I think that's another form of false flags. So I think if someday, as we hope not, and that China want to run some Chinese military action against Taiwan, and they will put aside the excuse to Taiwan, because Taiwan is doing something certain like what we indicate that we're going to do that militarily against Taiwan to stop the foreign power from getting in. As a matter of fact, we didn't do it, but it's a matter of interpretation. So I think that's another false flag attack, not militarily but politically and diplomatically. So that's something we should keep in mind. I think this kind of it's going to be very easy for China to use this kind of political false flag attacks against Taiwan.
Professor, do you agree with that? And also, what can Taiwan do about this? How can we build resilience to this?
Well, I think first of all, in terms of trying to find a pretext for any kind of military attack, and also both the United States and China, they consider a Taiwan Strait. There is a certain fixed view of that. And when United States talk about no unilateral change of status quo, but it will be defined by the United States. What is status quo? What is the change of status quo? So from China's perspective, they are also doing the same thing. I can interpret what constitute a foreign intervention in Taiwan. Before, for example, we talk about China said, oh, Taiwan cannot have anything that is similar to trying to have political independence. So people said, whoa, if we have a direct election of the president, that would be something that showing our sovereignty. China might attack. Boom, over, right? One thing that we abolish or we change, we retire all the representatives, legislators, and members of the National Assembly from mainland China in early 1990. They said, oh, we cut off our kind of connection with mainland China. That would be something, and then nothing happened, right? So even later, when our president, including Chen Shui-bian or current vice president, said, I am for Taiwan independence, and China finally said, well, if the legislature officially declare that will constitute independence, then they will use force. So we have been misled by all this possibility of Chinese attack for a long time. But that was when China was much weaker. Now I think they can find easy pretext or excuse to attack Taiwan. So what Taiwan, I think our government right now is saying we are maintaining status quo, right? So that, that will not give China a pretext, but that will also convince the Americans saying we are for status quo. But from China's perspective, your status quo is not the status quo I want. You are already moving toward independence. But that is not strong enough for China to use military force right now. But if there's something happen like U.S. more involved in Taiwan's domestic affairs, then I think there will be a stronger pretext for China to use force against Taiwan.
I wanted to pick up on something that you said. That you said that it is up to the U.S. to decide, to define what is a change to the status quo. And then on the Chinese side, it's the same.
Unilateral change.
And that is true, but there is also the distinction that one is a communist authoritarian state where the leader is not accountable to the people, and then in the US, obviously. Obviously they are. But I wanted to continue, Professor, with something the ambassador mentioned, which is the 20th Party Congress in China, and Xi Jinping called for the strengthening of the strategic deterrence for the PLA. So obviously people are saying that this is nuclear capabilities. Do you think that the US should be worried about China's nuclear buildup?
Well, I think in the past, right, especially under Hu Jintao, there was a possibility China talk about its peaceful rise, and then feeling that the peaceful rise might be a little bit threatening, so they changed the term to peaceful development. And people actually believe that China is a status quo power. China will remain in the East Asia, might have some military maneuvers in the, neighboring, waters, but not going to the deep water navy. But it has been changed. So right now, people look at China saying it is not a regional power or status quo power. It is it's moving toward the global one. I think that's the concern, why there's an international response to China's rising, maybe we can say threat, or China's provocation.
But how about on the nuclear capability side?
And China is developing, and always remember, Donald Trump mentioned before that U.S. has a great arsenal, but it's being old right now. Even the United States want to retire some of its older nuclear weapons and make new ones. But if China, just like other industry, like steel industry and other industry, they have this advantage of late development, including its aircraft carrier, because they are using the most recent technology, and everything will be more efficient, in doing that. So that's the advantage of a late developer. And if China decided, to go to be more serious about nuclear weapons, the number might be still, far away from Russia or United States, but it will be the more, fatal one. I think that's the worry here.
Ambassador, do you think that China would actually use these nuclears? Do you think they intend to, or is it more deterrence?
Well, I think the question was should U.S. worry about this? I think yes, it should. And I'm afraid that it is already worrying about that, because that reminds me of what happened in the last century between the former Soviet Union and the United States, when there was a contact between the two the two powers during the Cold War era. U.S. The first one who has produced certain created some nuclear warheads, intercontinental ballistic missile with a nuclear warhead, and Russia have not. I think they're lagging behind. But as time went by, as time progressed, the Russian, the Soviet Unions became more. So that's a SALT 1, SALT 2, SALT talks. These SALT talks, SALT, have pretty much characterized the bilateral relations between Washington and Moscow in the last century. But now China is looming as another nuclear power. I think this kind of a painful memory, this painful reminder, and the U.S. definitely will naturally apply that to China. Okay, so I think, let alone that China is one of the five, so-called the five, the nuclear weapon states, as they say in the short, NWS, recognized by the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And then, so now, according to the United States Defense Department, just a couple of days ago, bothered to report, to publicly announce that, the China is accelerating the development of the strategic nuclear warheads in the effort to amass 700. The figure has been put out, 700 by the year 2027. And then DOD continues saying that there'll be 1,000 by the year 2030. I think more than doubling, what the last year's estimate. So it reminds people that the U.S. policymakers, they have to to prepare for the worst scenario and come up with the best preparation, as we know that. So that's why I think that right now I have envisaged a couple of months ago that when the Ukraine war just took place, I think finally U.S. and China, as I told my students and my friends, that U.S. and China, although still involved in some confrontation on the surface, but they'll keep kind of ice breaking. And I think the U.S. will take the first move. So right after the 20th Party Congress, when Xi Jinping was so cruel in the way of dealing with his predecessor, his mentor, so to speak, and now suddenly the White House sent an invitation. To Xi Jinping, to the most unpopular, the politician in the world. And then the U.S. White House couldn't waste any time to send an invitation. We look forward to seeing you, in the G20. I think that's kind of one of the behaviors from the United States. They like to, reach a certain approachment as a beginning steps. But China is waiting there. We don't know yet. We should. I think that's what U.S. keep in mind, because the painful memory is coming back.
At the same event where he made the Taiwan comments, Vladimir Putin also called the visit by U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi an illogical provocation of China. The Russian tactic of accusing ex-Soviet states like Lithuania of provocation was the topic of comments by the deputy chair of the Committee on European Affairs in the Lithuanian Parliament in Taipei at a recent security forum hosted by the European Values Centre for Security Policy. Let's take a look as Zygimantas Pavilionis begins with the security situation in Lithuania.
Now we have American battalion, we have German brigade moving in. We are now building missile defenses after what we see in Ukraine. And to be honest, the bigger commitment from the West to Lithuania, the more respect from Russia comes. When the West made a very clear red line that actually it was even in 1993, with free trade agreements that it will lead to association and actually membership, Russia started to respect us. Russia withdrew troops from us. And you remember Ukrainian story in Bucharest NATO summit. Russia said, if you give NATO membership, that would be a provocation. You know what? Russia attacked Ukraine without even NATO membership. You see? So main conclusion to this provocation. You know what provokes those empires? Your weakness, your fear, the way you kneel and kiss the ring of Xi, the way you trade and you think that you will change their souls by money, forget about it. I repeat it, forget about it. Show your strength, resolve, your commitment to defend, and if they escalate, never de-escalate. Always escalate from your side. That's the only way to make them very clear.
That was the Lithuanian Parliament's European Affairs Committee Chair, Žygimantas Pavlionis, speaking at an event in Taipei about Lithuania's experience of Russian threats compared with what happened to Ukraine. Professor, Žygimantas says that weakness provokes those empires of Russia and China. What do you make of this assertion in relation to Taiwan?
I would not use the word provoke. I would say maybe invite, maybe give them a opportunity to do it. But being weak don't provoke someone, but just make it more attractive for other countries to attack. Because if you're weak, you're not going to be a threat to a power. Then why are they, trying to do something? But if you have a certain policy that it is in disagreement with the powers, yes, that would be a provocation. But being weak and alone yourself, it's not going to provoke war. But Taiwan's problem right now is, I personally think, is when China has, in the Taiwan policy we call white paper, 2 months ago, and then you have the 20-party Congress, and Xi Jinping says something about, peaceful unification with Taiwan, but doesn't rule out the use of force. We are only responding, to all this Chinese initiative. We don't have any formal kind of white paper ourselves because we are in an awkward position. We want to say we are independent, but then United States, no, you are not. So we cannot say that. And then we will not, it would be political suicide for any government right now say we want unification. That will stop China from saying Taiwan is having its separatist way and all that. So I think we are in a different position than Lithuania. Lithuania, for example, during World War II were independent, but Russia, after World War I, they became independent, and then Russia invaded in 1940. They took over, and United States never recognized these 3 Baltic states as part of the Soviet Union. But by establishing relations with mainland China in 1979, at least United States, we say, acknowledge that Taiwan was part of China, but we can also compare, saying, wait a second, this China is not PRC, not like Putin said, Taiwan is part of PRC. I think this is also our government.